Welcome to the 2021 virtual tour of Lombard Historic Homes. We're standing in front of a home that everyone knows and loves, the Victorian Cottage.
But today we're going to see some hidden gems across Lombard. Some you may have passed every day and never really realized the significance of to the town.
And some are ones you've passed many times, just wishing you knew more about the history behind them.
So buckle your seatbelts.
Or strap on your bicycle helmet.
Let's get ready to roll.
Welcome to the Cobblestone House, historically named the Dr. Stanley Tileman House. Built in 1921, this property features over half an acre, over 4,000 square feet of living space, 4 bedrooms, and 4 bathrooms. Dr. Stanley and his wife Bernice were the original owners, and it was actually Bernice's father, George Ritchie, who built the home. In fact, Ritchie built several houses in Lombard, including his own at 306 South Brewster. You can spot a Ritchie house by its distinct riverstone walls. 123 South Elizabeth is set back beautifully off the street, always leaving passerbys wanting to see more. This is an expanded 4-square home with a leveled pyramid roof and its distinctive riverstone foundation. The original partial front porch was expanded in 1980 to encompass the side and rear of the home. According to the Lombard Spectator, September 14, 1939, Dr. Tileman was a renowned horticulturalist and had 60 seedling dahlias and 75 named varieties in his garden. That's a lot of flowers. The Spectator noted that he, quote, also spends a considerable amount of time on the goldfish pond/pool, which is surrounded by tall banks of rock, some of which weigh a ton or more. Luckily, today's owners, Cher and Mark Herlacky, have renovated the pond to its former glory. In a book about the history of Lombard called Footsteps on the Tall Grass Prairie, there are wonderful excerpts about the man that Stanley Tileman was. After World War I, Dr. Tileman became professor and head of the Department of Fixed Partial Denture Prosthodontics at the University of Illinois. And, at the request of the Minister of Education of Argentina, Tileman spent 4 months teaching at the University of Buenos Aires. At a dinner hosted in his honor, he met a couple, Juan and Evita Perron. Perron had tooth problems and asked Dr. Tileman to fix his teeth. When Tileman refused payment, Perron was so impressed that he granted Tileman an honorary degree. At the embassy, Tileman was told that he had done more for international relations than he could ever realize. Yet another story describing the interesting, charming life of Stanley Tileman. And lucky for Lombard, we can use the same words to describe his beautiful home.
December 22nd, 1938. The Lombard Spectator prints a notice that construction on 212 West Grove Street has begun. The home's architects are Olson and Urbane of Chicago. And who is the Naperville resident who commissioned the home? Minnie A. Lodge. We know from the census data that Mrs. Lodge was never married, and she lived in a home with her sister, Esther. Minnie was a milliner. Now, that's not a profession you hear of anymore. A milliner is a hat maker, and in her day, it was a very good career. It strikes me that Minnie was an independent and self-sufficient woman, unique for her time. She was not only skilled milliner, but later on it was reported that Minnie made design adjustments to the home and oversaw construction. Sounds more like a woman of our time, so hats off to you, Minnie, pun intended. Minnie's home is a great example of the Cape Cod revival style. According to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, this style was one of the last of the American colonial era to later be revived. Cape Cod originates from fishing villages of Massachusetts and New York. Their hallmark was to be devoid of any architectural embellishments, while other homes of the time were awfully highly ornate with classical details. 212 West showcases plenty of traits of authentic Cape Cod, such as the dormers on the main facade, steep roof, brick chimney, and an eave above the entranceway. All the while, detailing was limited to multi-pane windows and decorative shutters. Both original features and later additions to this home gave it a unique character you see today. The living room has built-in bookshelves, and there's a second fireplace in the basement. There are now 2 additional wings to the home, a sunroom and a garage that feature delightful ornamental railing. Cape Cod remained very popular until 1950s, but with the introduction of the ranch-style homes, Cape Cod's all but disappeared. Such a charming and functional design, I believe, will come back when the time and style makes a comeback. For now, we're just glad that this is part of Lombard's rich history.
Newsflash! Lombard to soon have its first ever apartment house. Headlines: Park Manor Apartments rising opposite Village Hall. Building to cost $160,000, now being erected by local persons. What you just heard are excerpts from a 1929 article in the Village Spectator. Yes, this building was very exciting in its day, perhaps just as exciting as it is now in its own way. I mean, how many of you have driven past 43 North Park Avenue before and said, "Ooh, look at that building"? Note the rectangular section that's jutting out. Do you see that extra layer of brick wrapping around the edges, looking something like a jigsaw puzzle? That's an architectural element called quans. Now, quans are sometimes structural, they support joints, but sometimes they can be purely ornamental. I would say, taking into consideration this building as a whole, these quans are ornamental. I mean, come on, look at those transom windows above the doors, the stone band that lines the building, and those stone strips above every window. It's clear that in 1929, the local persons who came together to build a $160,000 first ever apartment home in Lombard wanted it done up right. $160,000 is $2.4 million in today's dollars. You may be wondering, isn't 1929 a little late for the first ever apartment house in this town? Good question. In its day, Lombard was actually known for being the village of homes, a great place for city working folk to commute by railroad and settle where there was, quote, real air and sunshine. But as the Lombard Spectator noted, Park Manor was going to afford the convenience of both apartment living and the railroad. Now, Park Manor was converted to condominiums in the 1970s. I think you will likely find it a little amusing what was advertised as luxurious home features, both in 1929 and the 1970s. But let's start with 1929. In the basement was an on-site laundry facility. While the machines today are nothing like those of 1929, to have on-site laundry was actually a pretty big deal. Also in the basement were living quarters for an on-site janitor. Those quarters have since been melded into additional storage, but ask any of the residents at Park Manor and they'll tell you, yeah, there's a weird extra door that leads into the basement. And finally, in 1929, every unit featured a built-in ironing board and, drum roll please, built-in kitchen cabinets. Can you imagine today moving into a home in which the kitchen cabinets were not built in? Speaking of the kitchen, let's fast forward. Condominiums did not become popularized until the 1960s, and it is very likely that many of Park Manor's prospective buyers did not fully understand the concept, as evidenced by original 1970s sales material. Prospects received a booklet titled A Guide to Condominium Ownership, which featured Q&A such as, "Can I sell a condominium apartment?" In the beautifully illustrated brochure, you'll see the courtyard, which is actually advertised as a Japanese garden. What qualifies it as a Japanese garden? It's enclosed by the building itself rather than being behind the building. Also, the walkway brings you through the garden, as opposed to around the perimeter. Also in this brochure, readers will find that every unit comes fully stocked with a frost-free refrigerator, gas cooking range, 2-spray dishwasher, and an all-electric fully automatic furnace. A fridge, a stove, a dishwasher, and a furnace in every unit? Get out of town. All kidding aside, Park Manor has been enthusiastically preserved and perfectly relished. All of those attractive features from 1929, the crown molding, the glass doorknobs, the oak floors, and the functioning transom windows in the kitchen, plus the proximity to the railroad and the shops on St. Charles, these are all things still enjoyed by the residents of 43 North Park Avenue today.
Imagine getting your Sunday Tribune, opening it up to the real estate section, and seeing a beautiful sketch of 200 North Main Street. The copy reads, "For sale or exchange, one of the finest and best residences within 20 miles of Chicago. 5 acres of grounds, nicely improved, value $9,000. Whoa, everything sounded exactly right up until the part about 5 acres and $9,000. Well, maybe it's because this is an excerpt from 1876. The breathtaking home before you was originally built in 1868 in the Italianate style. Samuel and Ruth Cromwell came here from New York and erected a home with sloping roofs, overhanging eaves, and lots of decorative brackets. These are the hallmarks of the Italianate style. Now, are you wondering why you don't exactly see those things now? Well, don't worry. It's because this home had an overhaul in the style in 1890. It was changed over to Queen Anne style home. The turret that defines this home to passerby, the mix of textures throughout the exterior, from the different types of shingles to the art glass and steeped pitch roof, are what make 200 North Main Street an archetype of this Queen Anne style. To sum up the Queen Anne style, make everything ornate and leave no surface flat. If you're wondering what the home originally looked like, an illustration appears in the 1874 DuPage County Atlas. This atlas featured maps, as well as sketches of prominent homes. First off, this home was once in the most prime of locations. What is now the Great Western Trail, the one running alongside the home, was the railroad. On the corner of Main and the tracks was fancy living back then. Samuel Cromwell is marked in the Lombard historical books on more than one occasion. In 1877, Colonel William Plum petitioned that the road in front of his home not be widened. Well, Mr. Cromwell was the one to cast the deciding vote, and not in Colonel Plum's favor. This must have made Mr. Plum pretty upset, because he filed a $45,000 lawsuit against Cromwell and lost. Finally, the home's fame was resurrected in the 1990s. If you lived here in Lombard in 1998, you are vaguely remembering an illustration of this house. That's because it was featured on a village sticker. We're very glad to be able to bring you 200 North Main Street today. It's one of those iconic Lombard homes that everyone at some time or another is sure to have craned their neck to get a closer look at. Now, the next time you drive past with friends or family, you can impress them with a few fun facts. The year is 1910. The place? Reno, Nevada. Newspapers are hot off the press announcing the divorce of wealthy businessman Danford Abrams. Within hours of receiving the divorce decree, Abrams is on the night train to Iowa. Another news flash, this one out of Cedar Rapids. Wealthy businessman Danford Abrams, just off the night train from Reno, meets a young and very wealthy Irene Ray Hoff to make her the second Mrs. Abrams. You have just crossed over into the Lombardian zone. Irene Ray Hoff was said to have had family connections in Chicago, which is likely why the once scandalous couple settled here and built the 3-story colonial revival you're looking at today. 211 North Main Street is located in the original town of Lombard, which, in 1916, experienced substantial tax increases. It was people like Abrams, wealthy capitalists, who could afford such stately homes in Lombard around this time period. Abrams himself was one of the incorporators of the Lombard Floral Company and a stockholder of the Lombard State Bank. Note the overhang supports by the columns above the front door. This is called a portico. Note the single stones accentuating the top of every window. They are referred to as keystones. And finally, the dormers, or pop-out windows you see on the roof. All features of the colonial revival style that was popular from the 1980s all the way through to the 1960s. While this structure currently stands with all the authority of a brick home, we know it was remodeled at some point from the original stucco and frame. We also know that the home must be as breathtaking inside as it is outside, as the current owners of this home are going on 40 years. Previous real estate listings of 211 North Main Street perfectly describe what we can only imagine exactly what Danford Abrams would have wanted. This house is an executive-type residence, two-way fireplace, built-in bookshelves, a butler's pantry, and a pegged oak floor. Yes, there's a lot of pride taken in this home. Its name, you can find etched into a column of cobblestones on the property, is Ray Farrow. The name honors both Abrams' second wife, Irene Ray Hoff Abrams, and his mother, Patience Farrow Abrams. Ray Farrow, a home for Lombard to behold. Welcome to the William Ralph Plum House. Does the name sound familiar? If you've lived in Lombard for any amount of time, you've likely heard or read the last name Plum before. Colonel William Plum and his wife Helen Plum were a big deal around here, and anyone who shared their name was, consequently, a pretty big deal too. The Plums donated the property for Lilacia Park. Moreover, Plum sourced the lilac collection himself. He had the breathtaking number of lilac bushes gathered from abroad and donated them to the park district. Their home was situated at the edge of Lilacia Park, which, after the death of his wife, was donated to become the library. So, if you didn't know before, now you know. That's where the name Helen Plum Library comes from. Back to the house. It was owned by Colonel Plum's nephew, William Ralph Plum, and his wife, Mary Van Patterson. Coincidentally, Mrs. Patterson was the author of the mystery novels. Any relations to James Patterson? We wonder. Just kidding. Mr. Plum built the Dutch colonial before you in 1929, and we know that by 1933 it was being used as a rental property. Given the stature of the Plum family, it is unsurprising they owned rental properties around Lombard. Also unsurprising is the style of the house they chose, as Dutch colonials were wildly popular from the 1880s through the 1930s. Do you see the unique shape created where the sidewalls meet the roof? That is called a gable, and it is the hallmark of Dutch colonial style, as is the bright turquoise door. Just kidding again. Can you imagine if they had bright turquoise paint in 1920s, how much it would have cost? All right, we're getting a little silly. On to the next house.
All homes have a story, a history of ownership that you can't necessarily see but know existed at some point in time. But every once in a while, that history appears, clear as day, right before you. When the current day owners of 515 Northwest Road were doing renovations, they found a piece of lumber stamped with Jacob Loy B. Grove. Who was this Mr. Grove? In 1858, 3 years before the start of the Civil War, Jacob Loy and his wife Catherine began building the house before you. Okay, so there's the Jacob Loy part. The B. Grove actually stood for Babcock's Grove, the original town that now includes Lombard. Loy's purchase terms of the land are pretty funny by today's standards. While him and his wife were still living in Pennsylvania, Jacob put $1,000 down on the 204 acres of land around you, and basically said to the current owner, "Make sure you farm the land until I get there, plus leave 5 tons of hay waiting for me. And, oh yeah, you have to keep up the fences before I give you the rest of your money." This modern-day interpretation sounds a little silly, but it illustrates just how different real estate dealings could be back then. 515 Northwest Road has been recognized multiple times for its significance. In 2017, it received a plaque from the Lombard Historic Preservation Commission. Do you ever wonder how homes are awarded one of those plaques? Well, a few ways. If they are 100 years or older, recognized for the significance of the architecture, or they housed a historically significant resident. But not all recognitions of 515 Northwest Road were historic ones, because back in 1862, just 4 years after the home was built, it was deemed a house of prominence. How do we know? The combination atlas map of DuPage County. This document was a compilation of personal examinations and surveys that featured maps, sketches, census data, and even biographies of county pioneers. Now, as you leave 515 Northwest Road, drive around the block and see if you can spot the second-story porch, which will just put you back in time, imagining the farmers who lived in this home looking out onto their work. If you were driving around the block 100 years ago, you would have seen dairy cows grazing. Did you ever wonder how dairy farmers kept milk cold back then? We know that the home's second owner, Peter Hoy, built a 12-foot cube-shaped building and lined it with cork. 2-foot blocks of ice were hauled by sleds, then placed on a loft 7 feet high within that cube. The milk cans were then placed underneath the ice loft. What a way to refrigerate. Talk about ice-cold milk. We hope you enjoyed your stop at the home of Mr. Jacob Loy of Babcock's Grove. Don't forget to try and take a peek as you drive around the corner.
Welcome to the Lombard's beloved horse barn. The red building in front of you was erected in 1880s. Outbuildings are not usually preserved in suburban towns, so to have this on the tour is a real treat. Take a closer look at the structure. Do you see where the stall doors used to be now bricked up? Note that there is also a window for every door. So, take a look. It goes window, door, window, door. Each horse had a room with a view. We're really glad that the Holmbergs decided to build their barn from brick rather than wood, so we can still enjoy it today. Are you ready for loads of charm and tons of character? Referred to as the Campbell House, this was the very first home that was built on Martha Street. The east end of the lot, or the backyard, is the end of the original town of Lombard. Now, the home was built using the balloon construction method. Rarely used nowadays, balloon construction was a timber frame where the studs went from the base of the house all the way up to the rafters of the house. Now, it's said that the origin of balloon construction was because the house looked so light that it looked like it might just float away. Well, if you're worried about that, don't be. Balloon construction homes have been standing for well over 100 years. Now, the style of this home is Queen Anne Victorian. This home features 7 beautiful rooms and sits on a 1/4 acre. Now, some of the features of the Queen Anne Victorian style were steep gabled roofs, ornate decorations, and stained glass. Now, the wraparound porch that you see is consistent with the Queen Anne style. Now, the Lombard Historical Society got a hold of the Campbell's original proposals to install some very modern features, including a furnace that would heat every room in the house and a special system that would push cool air through the hallways. Pretty cool. Now, the lavatory featured a huge enamel tub and an enameled sink, and also had its own water closet, what we call now a flushing toilet. And that's not where it ends, because it also had its own waste system. Now, in 1904, this would have been a state-of-the-art plumbing system. And to make that point just a little bit more clear, in the attic there was a cistern, or in other words, there was a barrel that was filled with water. Then water could be pumped from the cistern and gravity fed to the faucets below. Now, that's pretty cool, don't you think? Now, from 1904 to 1901, this was home to 2 notable women of Lombard. Joanna Campbell, a 40-year resident, was the charter member of the Lombard Women's Club. And Cora Hebel taught piano out of this house and actually had several recitals here as well. I think the gals would be very proud to see that the current owners have kept the charm of this house intact.
This beautiful prairie-style two-story was built in 1913. The historic name of the house is the Ralph W. Burrell House. Ralph was a mechanic and took out 3 construction loans in 1913 to build his experimental home, currently named the Concrete House. This strong house is going nowhere anytime soon, folks. The original architect, Milton Dana Merrill from Washington, D.C., planned some of the largest government buildings in America, and the home before you was likely built using the same method as large government buildings. Merrill patented a concrete construction and steel form system based on an invention by Thomas Edison. This system had extensive press in Chicago when a neighborhood of concrete houses was built in Gary, Indiana, known by the headlines as Concrete in the Steel City, the Edison Concept House. How about we throw out another big name? Theodore Roosevelt gave an award to Merrill in 1908 for his working-class houses where every wage earner could be his own landlord. The Merrill system was most actively used from 1913 to 1920, after which its use was almost obsolete due to the invention of concrete blocks. What you are looking at is a style of construction that would have made the house seem futuristic at the time it was built. A system of steel plates that acted as forms could be rotated up from tier to tier as the concrete was poured, which gave the house the appearance of growing before your very eyes. That must have been a sight for the neighbors to behold. Ornamentations include a parapet, the low edging you see along the roof, eaves and brackets, and a front balcony. The interior is highly interesting as it does not have any passive spaces such as hallways and entryways. The leaded glass windows and the use of French doors, along with the sleeping porch off the back bedroom, were all borrowed from Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie School architecture. From 1934 to 1967, the house was owned by George Goddard. Rumor has it that Goddard was among the first to bend fluorescent tubing. Indirect fluorescent lighting has been installed in the living areas, and the basement contains a considerable supply of various fluorescent tubes, decades old. Owners have passed them on as part of the house, which is kind of funny to imagine. How many of us have inherited old paint cans in the crawl space? But these guys inherited a lifetime supply of replacement bulbs. As is the case with many historic homes, 125 East Maple Street's various owners have never modified the original design, and we sure are glad. It is a true gem of the neighborhood, the Concrete House.
Driving down Main Street today, seeing it lined with homes and businesses, stopping at all the traffic lights, it's hard to imagine a time when 566 South Main Street would have been the only home you saw, all the way from the Prairie Path to the light at Madison and Main. Now, granted, neither the Prairie Path nor the light are actually in existence yet, because the year is 1847. Welcome to the oldest home on our tour. The style of home you are looking at is a modified upright and wing farmhouse. These are classified under folk architecture and were very popular in agricultural areas from the 1830s to the 1890s. Yes, I said agricultural areas. This used to be all farmland. Now, these upright and wing farmhouses most notably keep the formal and informal uses of a home separated. That's important with life on the farm. You see, the upright is reserved for things like the parlor, the library, guest bedrooms, whereas the wing is more for the mudroom, the kitchen, the bedrooms. 566 South Main Street is referred to as the Adam Gloss Farmhouse. Now, this was such an impressive farm that even long after Adam and his wife Katharina had lived there, the farm continued to bear the name. It was a massive property, including much of which is now the Green Valley subdivision. In fact, the purchase of the land by Green Valley's developers was so important that it is included in another spot on this tour. So it's 1943. The Burr family had been living here for at least 50 years, renting the home and farming the land, and they were ready to put in their bid. We actually know that it was Frederick John Burr who had put in the bid because the current owner just came out and told us that today. Now, meanwhile, Charles Kress and Victor Hoyer, two real estate developers, were scouting land for their post-World War II community. It was to be a neighborhood of inventive homes designed for the many veterans who were soon going to be returning home. Ultimately, it was Kress and Hoyer who had won the bidding, and in the 1950s, it was actually the home's current owner's father who purchased the home from Charles Kress. Full circle. The Lombard Historical Society uses things like census data and county maps to recount the history of a home. But every once in a while, a home will reveal fascinating clues all on its own. One day, the current owner found nails with square heads. Square heads? Imagine this happens to you in your home. You run to Google and open-endedly ask, nails with square heads, and soon you find out that your home must predate 1890. After you've taken in all of the fun facts of this tour, we encourage you to return to your very own home and see if you can find the clues to its history. You might be surprised at what you find.
"100 West Washington Boulevard is aptly and proudly named the Tribune Prize winner. As part of a post-World War II initiative, the Chicago Tribune created a competition to identify the future of affordable housing. And in 1947, the home before you had been built and opened to the public for viewing. It was fully decorated by Popular Home magazine and local Chicago artists. The Tribune reported that 14,000 people toured the home during its open house. A comment was made by Mrs. Harley Lichenberger of the Lombard's Women's Club, noting that the ample closet space met the standards of efficient housekeeping. Another comment from Mrs. Louise Houston of the Villa Park Women's Club said, quote, "The house is so cleverly arranged that the master bedroom can be used as a sitting room. When the young people of the family have guests, their parents will have their own quarters for listening to the radio, reading, playing cards, or pursuing hobbies." End quote. Post-World War II housing can be characterized by the fact that it summoned architects to design for a new era. The comments you heard certainly speak to the inventiveness of 100 West Washington Boulevard. And sure enough, W.R. Burns, Jr., the architect, claimed the $1,000 prize for his design of the home. Originally, the home was a sprawling ranch of 2,371 square feet. It had a Lannon stone exterior, which is a type of limestone. Note the overhanging eaves on multiple sides of the house. This creates what is called a cross-gable roof. And the chimney once gave way to two fireplaces, one outside and one inside. In 2001, major modifications were done, but there's one feature you can still clearly see. The entire central portion of the house, lined with a beautiful configuration of paired braided windows 29 feet in length, is devoted to the living area. It's a cheery room where the most valuable moments of family living take place. 100 West Washington Boulevard may be known as a prize winner, but more importantly, it is an inviting place for someone to call home. Now, I want you to take a second to imagine. Are you ready? Okay, imagine. The song Boogie Woogie Bugle Boys playing over your radio. There are posters on the trees that say, "Buy war bonds," and the home before you is absolutely astonishing. You have never seen anything like it before. The year is 1943, and up until now, the only slanted roofed home you've seen was in a magazine. Welcome to the Green Valley subdivision, one of Lombard's earliest post-World War II communities, and 242 West Washington Boulevard is one of the first homes in it. Being built in 1943, we can only presume that Green Valley's real estate developers were so eager to outbid the land's current caretakers, mentioned in another spot on this tour, because they anticipated the boom to come. You see, America was in dire need of affordable housing, and veterans were going to be returning en masse any day now. Sure enough, 1 year later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the GI Bill. The GI Bill offered government-backed, low-interest mortgages with low down payments and up to 30-year terms. It was extremely affordable housing like never before. Adjusted to today's dollars, a 2-bedroom home cost about $70,000, and the monthly payment averaged $400. Meanwhile, the monthly rent in an urban area was nearly $700. A lot of veterans were going to be visiting the likes of Green Valley to see a man about a home. 2.4 million veterans, in fact, secured home loans between 1944 and 1952. Getting back to this home, 242 West Washington Boulevard is an excellent example of the newfound technology architects and developers were incorporating at the time. Notice there are no electrical or telephone poles. The neighborhood was designed for the ultimate in aesthetics. Now take a look at the series of small windows lining the top of the garage. These are all southern-facing windows, which let in warmth on sunny winter days. When it's 1943 and you don't yet have a furnace, that warmth is pretty valuable. 242 West Washington Boulevard was reportedly designed by a highly recognized architect, George Keck. He was featured in the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago for designing homes of tomorrow. He was actually the first attributed to the phrase solar house by the Chicago Tribune. It would be no wonder that Green Valley's real estate developers would enlist George Keck to design the homes of their futuristic post-war neighborhood. Before we leave the Green Valley neighborhood, there is something worth mentioning about the past so that we never repeat it in our future. An early brochure for the subdivision lists 4 covenants for purchasing a lot, 3 of which are standard, but the 4th requires that the only occupants of the premises be Caucasian. It is horrifying that less than 100 years ago, such a covenant, and unfortunately the norm in many neighborhoods around Chicago, would spell out discrimination in the policy. Today, we welcome our neighbors as neighbors, and all of us can appreciate the architecture that Lombard has to offer.
Well, welcome to the Dairy Queen. Despite a village ban on rooftop signs, this 1950s sign depicting an ice cream cone with a swirly tip perched atop the Main Street Dairy Queen is here to stay. Now in 2000, the village board accepted a recommendation from the Historical Commission to have the sign designated as historically significant. And we sure are glad that Lucille Mays, the original owner, accepted this offer. Now the charm of the sign somehow takes us back to a simpler time in our life. And it's said and reported that it is one of the very few original Dairy Queen signs in the whole country, and certainly the only one in northern Illinois. Now, when restoration was done on the sign, it was discovered that the cone was originally built to have flashing lights. Now, Lucille decided not to go for this option, but the current owners decided that they would go back to the natural intent, and that's what we see today. The Dairy Queen was built in 1953. The architecture is mid-century modern. This white concrete walk-up building with flat roof features wide eaves and stucco interior walls. Now, while the building itself is not designated as historically significant, I like to think that it's holding one of the gems of our history. So I'm going to say that it's traditionally significant. You know, for generations, families have been coming to the Dairy Queen to get their swirly cones or their blizzards, maybe during the Lilac Parade or just on the way to the park. It certainly is a historical significance to our town. Well, we sure have seen some beautiful homes today. Did you have a favorite, Arena?
Oh, that's hard to choose, Tom. I mean, the Lombard Historical Society did a great job of curating a selection of homes that highlighted so many different parts of the past. What about you, Tom?
Oh, I'm just grateful that we got to enjoy these homes thanks to the efforts of the residents and the Lombard Historic Preservation Committee.
Yeah, and the Kiwanis Club of Lombard for helping make the tour possible.
And hey, the Kirkwood Players.
Hey, that's us. Well, we hope you had some fun and learned a few things to impress your fellow Lombardians with.
So long, and hey, maybe we'll see you at the Dairy Queen.
Ooh.